The Yakuza series has always been rather quaint to me. I mean, I knew the franchise existed, but never really bothered to play any of the games. But with 2020 being the worst year of all time, curiosity got the better of me and I picked up a couple of the games. So far I've only played this game and the 2 remakes, but I gotta say, this franchise is pretty cool. It's a series of action-based sandbox games set in a Japanese environment. They all follow a pretty melodramatic story and are packed with enough content to fill a freight train. But y'all want more than just my surface level thoughts, so let's dive right in. But man, there's just so much to say about this game, I have no idea where to start. I guess it would be appropriate to start with how the game plays. Unlike most sandbox games that let you cause mayhem or destruction at every turn, Yakuza instead does the opposite. The player is physically prevented from harming anyone until they are provoked. Sure, you can shove people aside all you want, but you can't actually harm anyone until they provoke you first. It's a more passive take on the sandbox style, and it's pretty unique for the genre. It also adds a level of immersion to the game. Most normal people can't pull a minigun out of their jockstrap and start mowing down everything in sight. And while it's admittedly the safer option to let the player run wild, Yakuza instead prioritizes story and immersion over slapstick humor. That's not to say that there's no fun to be had. Starting with the combat, I should give some context on the story so any outsider is not confused. The game has 2 playable characters. Series protagonist Kazuma Kiryu and series lunatic Goru Majima, with this game being their origin story. But just because it's an origin story doesn't mean the game can't innovate. In fact, the game introduces a brand new combat engine to the franchise. Both playable characters are given 3 fighting styles to choose from, with the 4th one being locked behind player progression. This not only gives the player plenty of options as to how they want to play, but also gives them plenty of variety in case they get bored. Although there is admittedly more variety when playing as Majima, Kiryu's fighting styles are rather basic. There are just 3 different ways for him to punch people, either fast in rush mode or strong and slow in beast mode, with Brawler being an in-between, and his legend style is basically an all-in-one, with it being incredibly fast and strong while implying both kicks and fists. They're not awful, they just don't really stand out from one another. Admittedly, it is fun to go beast mode on all the minions and beat them down like they're bowling pins. Majima's styles are far more varied, with Brawler being the most basic yet most agile, allowing you to sidestep multiple times at once. Slugger, meanwhile, gives you a permanent baseball bat that deals tons of damage, and its nunchuck twirl is fucking broken. And Breaker turns this brash and dangerous Yakuza into a disco dancing ninja with some of the most unbalanced attacks I've ever seen. He will dance when he wants to, and he will leave your ass behind. And his 4th style, the Mad Dog of Shimano, is just scary. Not only do you get a permanent dagger that can rip through enemies like paper, but it also has one of the most savage heat actions in the entire game. And that's really saying something, especially in this game where the heat actions are displayed in more vibrant and fluid character motion. The heat actions are undoubtedly the best thing about Yakuza's combat, at least for me. Wait, Dragon, what's a heat action? Heat actions are essentially signature finishing moves you'd see in other fighting games, similar to the X-ray moves from Mortal Kombat, minus the part where you get to see their bones fracture beneath your fists. And like I said before, there's tons of variety, to the point where almost every fight has endless possibilities. Either knock them down like a bowling pin, serve them up with a side of salt, or put them up against the wall and make it hurt. And that's only scratching the surface. There are so many heat actions in this game that listing all of them would take literal hours. Besides, it's best that you experience these firsthand, because as I said, they were the best part of the game for me. You can also grab enemies to perform a heat action. There's not much to say about the grab, it's just as simple as grabbing an enemy. Although for some reason you can't grapple some bosses, as they will either escape your grab or just want to fucking work on them. Wait, what the fuck? You can pull weapons out your jockstrap in this game? Well, to be fair, you still can't pull out shit like a minigun, but there are weapons you can utilize in the combat. There's also a weapon broker where you can purchase classic Japanese weaponry like the tonfa, kale sticks, nunchucks, and of course the classic samurai sword. It should be said that most weapons have durability, so if you overuse the damn thing, it'll break, meaning you have to go and get it repaired. The ones that don't break are very rare and can only be obtained by grinding the weapon market. Now, only Majima can do this, but you can send agents out on reconnaissance missions to pick up weapons and materials. You'll need a lot of cash to do so the question becomes, how do you make so much money in this game? And I think that's a perfect segue to start talking about the game's economy. So how do you make lots of money in this game? Well, you've got plenty of options. You can either grind goons into the dirt and take their lunch money, gamble it all on a cat girl fight, or wrestle with one of the major side gigs. Deconstructing those options for a bit, every time you use a heat action on an enemy, you get some cash out of it, and you also get cash for defeating enemies. Either with special conditions like not getting hit during the fight, or performing a heat action to finish them off, stuff like that. Needless to say, it doesn't pay enough for you to get by in this game. The Catgirl Fight Club is actually a gamble, meaning if you lose, well, that's on you and you just lost a bunch of cash. And unless you're a professional at rock, paper, scissors, I wouldn't recommend it. Unless you get off on seeing girls in skimpy outfits fight each other to the death. In which case, why are you playing this game? You can also compete in these Fight Club style arenas and get a lot of cash that way. I mean, it's an option, and I would recommend it if you're a fan of the game's combat. And as for the major side gigs, Kiryu gets to play as a real estate agent, and Majima gets to run a cabaret club. Starting with the real estate stuff, it's rather dull. First you buy the properties, then you micromanage the properties, then you tell the properties to pay up, and then you wait for them to do so. Yeah, nothing makes a side gig better than having to wait in-game hours to get it done. You can speed up the process by exchanging CP, and there is plenty of side content to do in the meantime, but that's an excuse, not the solution. I shouldn't have to wait to get it done. This is Yakuza, not gacha game. Not to mention that there's no way of knowing what buildings you can and can't buy. At least without going around town and ramming your face into the side of every building. There's a map, but the properties don't display on the map, it just shows the city block. It doesn't even check off the ones you've already bought, so why is it even fucking here? Majima's Cabaret Club is much better because I actually have to participate. You still have to purchase properties, but instead of waiting, you get to play a little minigame. If you ever played one of those top-down dating sims, this should be quite familiar to you. You match the customer with the preferred hostess in order to make them cough up as much money as possible. Eventually, they'll ask for help, prompting you to interact and give them what they need. Just match the right hand sign and bada bing bada boom, the customer is happy. It's not completely easy though. There is a time limit, and some customers will not give a fuck what hostess you give them unless you give them the one they want. Maybe the one they want is already occupied. You also get a special something. I don't know what to call it. When the bar fills, you get to activate something called Sunshine Fever, which apparently makes everyone in the room make it rain. The more bars you got filled, the more customers will be affected by it. It also gives the hostesses a health boost and slightly raises their performance. You can also micromanage the hostesses themselves, mainly by selecting which ones you want to put on the roster. You can get more girls by running around the overworld and bribing them, exchanging CP points, and completing side missions. I should mention that there's also special training in makeovers, but you can only do that for a couple of hostesses. which kind of defeats the purpose of the whole thing. Like, am I supposed to believe that the ones I picked off the street just got this down on day one? Now, these major side gigs also have their own story to complete. But all it amounts to is taking out the competition and being the last manager standing. You can inflate your business by purchasing properties, when you find them, of course, but that's going to require a lot of cash, especially for Kiryu, because some of the properties he has to buy are fucking ludicrously expensive. Hell, even his upgrades are more expensive, and I'm not kidding when I say that it's more expensive to upgrade Kiryu than Majima. Like, what the fuck? I mean, Majima clearly has the advantage here. The Cabaret Club plays a lot, and Breaker is essentially a money-making machine. But for Kiryu, the only way to make money really fast in this game is this asshole. This is Mr. Shakedown. He's essentially a mini-boss type of enemy that likes to roam around the overworld. There are 4 Mr. Shakedowns in the game, 2 for each character. Fighting him is a simple risk-reward type of fight. If you lose, he takes every penny off of you. If you win, you take every penny off of him. Simple as that. And when I said risk, I meant it. If you are not careful, he can and will knock you out with ease. He deals so much damage. This makes fighting him fairly a lost cause, so I normally tend to cheese it. In fact, here is Dragonfire's Guide to Grinding Mr. Shakedown. Now you'll need the Encounter Seeker equipped in order to see him on the minimap. This basically lets you see all enemies on the minimap, and Mr. Shakedown in particular is this purple icon. When you are fighting Mr. Shakedown, it is important to not get hit. I know that sounds redundant, but let me explain. You see, during the fight, you'll get bonus cash every time you hit Big Chungus, and your bonus decreases massively if he hits you. I'd also recommend using only Rush and Thug style when fighting him, because Beast is too slow, and Breaker is far better for crowd control. He also cannot be stunned by combo attacks, so that rules out Slugger and Brawler. And the 2 legend styles are basically locked for most of the game. And whatever you do, do not try to grab him. It will not work. Heat actions work. In fact, they're a big help at chipping out his health bar because later on he gets lots of health. There's also items that can save you from dying, or losing. And there's an item that can prevent you from losing all your cash when he defeats you. Finally, if he does manage to defeat you, don't worry, just enter and exit a building and he'll reappear on the minimap, probably asleep, dreaming of his next trip to space. Sure, it's repetitive as hell, but it works and it pays greatly, and you'll need all the money you can get in this game. The primary reason is because money is used to buy upgrades for your character. A bit weird, but okay. And some of the upgrades are locked behind player progression, in which the only way to unlock them is by grinding out the major side gigs, that being the real estate and the cabaret club. Which means you need to purchase a lot of properties, which means you need a lot of cash to purchase those properties, and you see where I'm getting at? And now that I'm on the complaint train, it's time to start talking about what I don't like about this game. Starting out small, I'm not a fan of the inventory system. More specifically, how you can't stack medicine. You can stack plates, even fish, but not stuff that you'll actually need. I already mentioned the property nonsense, but some of the properties require you to become friends with the person in charge, which basically amounts to either a fetch quest or having to buy a lot of stuff from that store. It's just tedious is all it is. How come there's no heat action for the katana? Like the other day I got this extremely sturdy wooden sword and yet I can't do heat actions with it? It's kind of bummer. Well, at least I can do this. Getting shot puts you in this I fucking hate you animation where you have to mash the X button to escape. There is a talisman to get past this, but needless to say, if you don't know how to get that talisman, this gets really annoying. Especially when there's more than one guy with a gun. As much as I love the heat actions, they can get pretty repetitive. Especially when you're seeing the same one 5 times in a row. Wanna play a game of pool? So would I! It doesn't fucking work in this game. You cannot lightly tap the ball. No, instead you can only smack it like it's a wrecking ball. Because of this, more often than not, I screw up my own shots. I just want to hit the ball into the hole. Instead, I hit the ball on onto the other side of the fucking table. Yes, I am autistic. Fuck you. When you beat the game, you can do this premium adventure sort of thing, which is basically just exploring the sandbox without having to deal with the story. Which is pretty cool, all things considered, although I do have a problem with it. Namely, why can't I wear this outfit in premium? I can only wear this outfit in the beginning of the games. It's weird. Alright, enough of the small stuff, it's time to go big. Now, while cash is used to purchase a majority of your upgrades, there are some moves that can only be taught to you by specific people. Don't worry, it's just one person per style. By that I mean, this guy is for Brawler, this guy is for Rush, and so on. However, Rush in particular is my least favorite to upgrade. It's as simple as playing tag. You just have to not get hit for 60 seconds. But if you do get hit a single fucking time, you are forced to sit through this painfully slow animation that cannot be skipped, where the enemy just calls you a loser and takes your lunch money. And if you want to try again, you have to pony up another, say, $5 million? This is one expensive game of tag. And of course, when I go to collect footage of it, I fucking ace it in one sitting. Just my fucking luck. However, I do have footage of the rival battles, which I hate most of all. How they work is that you run the cabaret club like normal, alright? But now you have this asshole on the bottom that can completely screw you over with their own special bullshit power. The only way around this is to get a lot of fans so that they can't charge their special as fast. How do you get more fans? Well, by purchasing properties. Ugh. And grinding the cabaret club. Even after purchasing all the properties in that area, I still had to grind for hours in the cabaret club before the rival club would even challenge me. And I had to grind even longer to get by without losing. Like, when did this game become so grindy? And unlike the Rush style, the cabaret battles are mandatory if you want to get Majima's Legend style, which may end up letting you down when you realize you can't even fully upgrade it until you exchange a fuck ton of completion points. But I'm not done yet, because there's also the super secret boss fight, which is, without hyperbole, fucking bullshit. To start, you can't even fucking fight the guy until you complete all the side missions for one character. So I only got to do it with Majima, and I ain't gonna do it for Kiryu because fuck that. Having to fight this boss alone was enough to make me want to quit the game and eat the disc. I ain't doing it a second time. First, he starts out by copying Kiryu's Legend style, except now he gets this flip attack that can shoot a paper bag into your inventory. And when you eventually get him down to half health, he starts copying Majima's Legend style. Like, talk about a fucking copycat. He deals so much damage, manages to clog up your inventory with his own bullshit, and yet he has more health than any enemy in the entire game. And I thought Mr. Shakedown had a girthy health bar. This makes the fight more focused on endurance rather than skill. And while those are fine and dandy, there will come a point where you just want the fight to end. So yeah, I just cheesed the fight. And here's how I did it. On my second try, I found out that jabbing him with a spear will disrupt his combo attacks. It even stuns him for a little bit, so I just kept poking him with a stick while occasionally doing a heat action. When he starts imitating Majima, I found out I can block his attacks if I have Slugger equipped. So the fight just became this tug of war where I kept blocking his attacks and gaining heat energy for blocking, and then hitting him with a heat action. It was repetitive as all hell, but I eventually got through it. And what do you get for doing all of that? Nothing. You get a shitty pair of sunglasses and that's it. It definitely wasn't enough to make up for the insanity that I had to deal with. Look, I know I just went really negative right there, but I want to stress that whatever qualms I have against this game are outmatched by everything it does right. The combat, minigames, side content, music, story, and characters are all so good that they keep me coming back for more. Speaking of which, let's address the game's story for a little bit. The story of Yakuza 0 is densely packed, so much so that telling all of it would likely take me an hour. So to save us both time and a headache, I'll stick to a broad summary and list my problems with it afterwards. Spoiler warning, last chance to skip to the time print on screen. Are you ready? Let's do this. The story centers around the conflict between the Dojima family and Tachibana Real Estate. Kiryu gets framed for a crime he didn't commit and defects from the Dojima family. Shortly after, he joins Tachibana Real Estate to clear his name. Unfortunately for him, this puts Kiryu on the top of the Dojima's kill list, which in turn forces Kiryu to cut ties with his family in the vain hope that they'll be safe this way. Thankfully, Tachibana manages to convince the Tojo clan to cease their hunt for Kiryu's head. Meanwhile, Majima is trying to atone for his abolishment from the Tojo clan and is running a nightclub called The Grand. Segawa offers him a chance of redemption. All he has to do is kill Makoto Makimura. Upon learning that Makoto is a defenseless blind lady, Majima vows to protect the person he was hired to kill. Because of course he does. She eventually gets captured and handed off to Tachibana Industries, with Kiryu being assigned as her protector. But oh no, her brother dies and she runs away. While on the hunt for Kiryu, Majima stumbles upon Makoto and she asks him to kill the Dojima family to avenge her brother. When he refuses, Makoto decides to take matters into her own hands. Predictably, that doesn't go well. This sends Majima on a warpath, willing to wipe out the entire Dojima family. Oh, but then it turns out Makoto's going to be fine. Back to sanity. I might be sounding negative, but I actually like the game's story. It's incredibly straight-faced, almost to its detriment, but the characters are likable enough for me to see it through. However, I do have some problems with it. Mainly with Makoto's offer. She literally goes to the devil's doorstep alone and only realizes it's a bad idea after she gets shot. Like, I know people do stupid things when they're grieving, but this is just too silly for me to suspend my disbelief. I also have to question making Shibusawa the final boss. Up till the final act, this guy has been nothing more than a background character. As such, defeating him at the game's climax feels a bit hollow. Let me explain. In order for the game to have a truly satisfying ending, you gotta give the player a brimming boss fight to finish it off. There's two ways of going around this, either thematically or mechanically. Mechanically satisfying bosses include the Soul of Cinder from Dark Souls 3, Clayface from Arkham City, and the Icon of Sin from Doom Eternal. Neither of these bosses has much presence in the story before their fights. That doesn't take away the fact that the fights themselves were pretty fucking awesome. They exist to fully test everything the player has learned up to now, so defeating them signifies that the player has mastered the game, thus making them mechanically satisfying bosses. The other end of the spectrum, that being thematically satisfying bosses, are those that have had such a major impact on the story or the player character themselves. Bosses such as Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder, Zeus from God of War 3, and Doc Ock from Insomniac's Spider-Man. Regardless of the fights themselves, these bosses have had such a major impact on the stories they're placed in. Gwyn being the archetype of all of Lordran's tales, Zeus being the paragon behind all of Kratos' suffering, and Doc Ock, a former friend now opposing everything you stand for. Their importance to the story outright trumps their boss fight, mainly because without them, the story would be completely different, and may not have impacted me the way it did. This is partially why I felt unsatisfied after fighting Shibusawa. He just wasn't in much of the story, so fighting him felt a bit empty. They tried their damnedest to hype it back up by revealing Shibusawa has a dragon tattoo on his back, and Kiryu says something like there can only be room for one dragon, but it just doesn't feel as impactful as other bosses within the same game. Mind you, I'm saying it's thematically unsatisfying. Mechanically speaking, it's a pretty fucking cool boss fight. Shibusawa fights as though he has 3 styles of his own: Rush, Beast, and Brawler, and each of them perfectly mirror Kiryu's fighting styles, thus making it as though you were fighting your own twin. This helps in making the fight stand out in my mind. But thematically speaking, it could have been better. Even after the fight, it doesn't really feel like the game's over, as the story just has this montage of how everything's going to go back to normal and we're just going to continue the story in the next game. I guess my biggest problem with the story is how disposable it is. You could completely skip this story and not miss anything, which is kind of disappointing considering this is meant to be an entry point into these characters' lives. And while Majima clearly got more fleshed out, Kiryu's story feels more like a filler arc, like something that's supposed to connect the dots. Because of this, his story doesn't really have any closure, so it just leaves me feeling a bit hollow inside. This isn't really a deal breaker for me, as I can still enjoy the game even if it has a bummer story. To me, the most important thing the game needs to nail is to be fun and enjoyable, and Yakuza 0 succeeds that in every way. So overall, the story just leaves me wanting more, but I'm not disappointed with what I got. It's a pretty good first impression, and if you're willing to look past what little flaws it has, you might find that there's a lot more to love. I'm running out of things to say about this story, so let's just move on. Shifting gears to the side content, there is so much to do in this game. Like, if I were to make a list of everything you can do in this game, the side content itself would take up about 5 pages. Which is good, because it means there's so much for the player to do. But it also means that I don't have a clue where to start. Well, outside of the main story, there's also 2 other stories to complete for each side gig. The story itself being a bit basic, but there are additional boss fights, so it's not too bad. There's also plenty of side missions to do alongside it. Although a lot of them just end up being fetch quests, or the stereotypical, here, go talk to this person. But there were some that stood out to me. Like there's this one where Kiryu has to pretend to be a movie producer, except he has no idea what the fuck they're saying and you have to guess what they need, or you'll risk fucking up the scene. The best bit is how hilarious the options are. Like here, they tell me to grocer the erasable, and one of my options is to fetch a grocery clerk. And immediately after it, they tell you to jeer the props and strike the set, and you're given the option to punch the dishes. So that's what I did. Then there's this one where you can't understand what this lady is saying, and you think she asked for a pizza when she actually needs a visa. Like, who comes up with this stuff? Majima has some funny ones as well. Like there's this one where you see this guy pretending to be a statue. He needs to use the bathroom, so you have to distract the crowd. The most successful options being shout that there's a UFO and sing a song. But the other options are pretty funny, I'm not gonna lie. Then there's this one where you get to be a lab rat and try all the concoctions these 2 made. Clearly as an attempt to spice up the combat a little bit. Like there's this one that randomly switches your fighting styles, although you only have 4 to pick from, so it's not that big of a deal. Then there's this one that completely messes up the game screen. It becomes kinda hard to see what the fuck I'm doing. It's just a shame it's so short though. Like maybe make one where everything becomes black and white, or one where you can't move without attacking. That would be pretty neat. There are also those side missions that take themselves a bit too seriously, and while this is just my opinion, I personally believe that the funny ones are the better side missions. The reason being is that they perfectly break up the monotony of the serious as fuck main story. A video game is still meant to be entertaining after all, and if you're too serious for too long, you risk alienating the player from the conflict. So if the player ever needs a break from the drama, they can always talk to a random individual on the street and help them with a crossword puzzle. Or they can play one of the dozens of mini-games. Oh yeah, the mini-games. There's tons of them. My favorites being the karaoke, disco, bowling, and pocket circuit, which is basically just slot car racing, but god damn, there is a lot more to it than just that. You get to design your own cars, your own tracks. It's honestly astounding how much detail there is in such a little attraction. And while I could go into more detail, I think that would be ruining the experience for yourself, so I won't. What I will say is that if the story isn't your cup of tea, by all means, try one of the minigames. Who knows? You might love them as much as I do. Regrettably, I won't be spending too much time on this topic either. Now, I'm no music connoisseur, so be sure to take everything I say in this section with a grain of salt. However, it may be a subjective opinion, but I personally believe the game has an awesome soundtrack. Although you don't need me to tell you that, you've likely been hearing it throughout the entire video. 100% of the music in this video comes from the game's soundtrack. Here's hoping that admitting this will keep me out of copyright infringement. But perhaps you're not convinced and you need an example. So let's focus on one song in particular and show off how awesome it is. And now for clarification, I don't know what this song is called, as the title is written in Japanese, but here's a sneak preview of my favorite song in the game's soundtrack. It's a thematically sorrowful song that only appears in your final fight with Yakuza. The two of you have clashed at least 4 times before this. However, every clash prior to now has always had this song in the background. Annoyingly, the title of this song is also in Japanese. The song itself is perfectly fine, gets the heart pumping, and fits well with the boss fight. Saying that though, changing it from this upbeat rock song into something almost heart-wrenching really spoke a lot about Kuze's character. To you, this may just be another fight with Kuze, a boss you've fought 4 times now. However, this sudden change in the soundtrack manages to convey that things are different now. This isn't just another fight. This is his final fight. The last chance he has to prove that he's better than you. Though his attempt may be futile, he doesn't care. His pride prevents him from admitting that there's someone stronger than him. Even before the fight, he laments that the only thing keeping him standing is his pride. Because at this point in the story, he has nothing else to gain from defeating you. Defeating you here and now will grant him nothing. He's already lost his rank, his pinky, and has now lost the respect of his subordinates. As such, he's become more desperate, and is now willing to risk his neck without a thought of what he stands to gain or lose. It's just a shame that the cutscene feels the need to point all this out to the player. To me, the best music is able to convey so much emotion without saying a word. As such, the song manages to convey such sadness and desperation, while at the same time providing mini climactic intervals to not feel out of place with the fight. It's the type of song you'd hear in the background of the final fight of an anime. But above all else, it's this song alone that manages to elevate this fight above all the others. There's just one problem with that, and that's that everything I've said as of now is completely subjective. What I just expressed is what this song meant to me. As such, your experience may be completely different. You may not even notice the song, or you might hate it. I'm not here to dictate anything. I'm simply expressing how I feel. To me, Yakuza 0 stands on the verge of perfection. It has a thrilling and dramatic story with characters you grow to love or despise, combat that's both easy to learn and fun to pull off, and provides so much to do after the credits roll. Whether or not it's the best game in the franchise is certainly up for debate. But as it stands, if you want to experience this franchise for yourself, then Yakuza 0 serves as the perfect place to start. So my final score for Yakuza 0 is a 9 out of 10. Be sure to express your opinions in the comments below. Don't forget to tune in next time for my audition of Bakami Tai. Until then, I prefer Judgment over 24 Cinderella. See you later.
Oh, breaking the law, breaking the law, 壊せ切り裂けてんだね Oh, breaking the law 六法全書じゃ縛れない波乱分子さ振り上げた拳が俺たちのジャッジメント